welcome. And thank you for being here. There's no need to do anything at all. Simply allow my voice to be a soft companion as you begin to drift toward the quiet story of a place that, officially, never existed. In our time together tonight, learning to understand only the gentle rhythm of a story. A story that begins on a cold street corner under the pale, hazy glow of a Moscow winter sky. It's a story about a building with no name, and a science that lost its way. Before we drift afar, if you feel a connection to this place, you're welcome to leave a quiet like or subscribe. Think of it not as a task, but as leaving a soft footprint in the snow before you continue your journey inward. And if you wish, you can leave a quiet note in the comments below, letting me know what city you're listening from, and what time it is for you now. It's just a nice way of knowing we're all sharing this quiet moment in different parts of the sleeping world. And so, find that gentle darkness in your room, perhaps with a soft blanket pulled a little closer as we begin our slow drift into tonight's tale. The air is brittle, so cold that each breath you take feels like it might crystallize in your lungs. You're standing on a quiet street in Moscow, sometime in the late 1930s. Snow, grayed by the city, is coiled in soft mounds along the pavement. The street is called Var Son of Yev Sky Lane. It's a short, unremarkable alley really. A place of shadows and secrets. Just a stone's thrown's throw from a much more famous, and much more feared, address, the Lubyanka, the massive, imposing headquarters of the NKVD, the secret police. You pull the collar of your coat a little tighter, your gaze fixed on a building across the way. It's nothing. Truly, just an anonymous, grey stone building indistinguishable from a dozen others around it. It might be a minor government records office, or a block of apartments for mid-level bureaucrats. There are no signs, no flags, no intimidating guards at the door. Just a few windows, their curtains drawn offering no clue to the world inside. Honestly, if you were a real Muscovite from this era, you'd walk past this place 1,000 times and think nothing of it, which for your long-term health would be the absolute best case in area, but you know better. You know this building is a lie. This place has a name, though it's never written on any door or map. It's known in the hushed, terrified whispers of the inner circle as the Kamera, the chamber. It is, for all intents and purposes, a laboratory. But the scientists here aren't searching for a cure for the flu. They are specialists. Their field of study is finality. They are tasked with creating poisons. Not just any poisons, but perfect ones, tasteless, odorless, undetectable. Poisons that could be sipped into a glass of wine or a bowl of soup, leaving behind nothing but a death that looks, to all the world, like a sudden, tragic heart attack or a stroke. This is laboratory number first, the original, the prototype. Historians, piecing together shredded documents and the fading memories of old men decades later, are still not entirely certain how it all began. Some accounts suggest it started as a small, informal project, a dark idea whispered in the ear of a high-ranking official. Others claim it was a formal, state-sanctioned program from its very first day, a direct response to the leader's ever-growing paranoia. The paper trail, as you can imagine, was not designed for public record. The truth is likely somewhere in the murky middle, a creeping evolution from a sinister thought into a fully funded, fully staffed instrument of the state. You watch as a single black car, the CIS 101, pulls up to the curb, its engine a low rumble in the frozen quiet. It idles for a moment, to men in dark overcoats inside, their faces obscured by shadow and the condensation on the windows. They don't get out. It's as if they're just checking, making sure the street is empty, making sure the coast is clear. The simple, unnerving presence of that car transforms the scene. The unremarkable building no longer seems boring, it seems watchful. The drawn curtains are no longer just curtains, they are eyelids, closed but aware. The silence of the street is no longer peaceful, it's heavy, charged with unspoken purpose. You feel a strange, cold pull towards it. A morbid curiosity. You want to see what's behind the plain facade. What does a place look like where the very building blocks of life are methodically unraveled? You take a slow, cautious step off the curb, the crunch of your boot in the snow sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. The black car remains, its engine humming like a patient predator. The building waits, and you find yourself walking towards it, drawn into the quiet heart of the shadow. The black car doesn't move. Its engine remains a soft, menacing purr. You reach the building and stop before the entrance. It isn't grand. It isn't even a proper entrance, more like a service door you might find in the alley behind a theater. It's painted a flat, battleship gray, the kind of color that seems to absorb light and hope in equal measure. There is no handle, just a small, recessed metal latch. No doorbell, no peephole, no number. It is a door that has been professionally designed to be ignored, to be utterly forgettable. You feel the cold seeping through the soles of your shoes as you stand there, a moment of hesitation in the biting wind. You raise a hand, your fingers clumsy in the cold, and you press the latch. It gives way with a quiet, well-oiled click. The door swings inward without a sound, opening into a small, cube-shaped room. You step inside, and the heavy door swings shut behind you with a soft, definitive thump and the click of a magnetic lock. The sound from the street is gone. Instantly. It's as if you stepped into a vacuum. The air in this tiny antechamber is still and dry, identical to the one you just came through. You are in a box between worlds, a place that is neither the city outside nor the facility inside, a moment of sterile purgatory. A thin, horizontal slit slides open in the second door at eye level. You see nothing but a sliver of darkness, but you feel the weight of a gaze studying you. No words are exchanged. There's no challenge, no password. After a few seconds that stretch into an eternity, you hear a loud, metallic clunk as an unseen bolt is drawn back. The second door opens. You step through and the world changes again. The cold of the street is replaced by a consistent, regulated temperature, neither warm nor cool. The only light comes from bare bulbs in wire cages, casting long, distorted shadows down a corridor that stretches before you. The silence here is different. It's not the absence of noise. It's an enforced, watchful quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you conscious of your own breathing, the soft rustle of your clothes. The air smells faintly of carbolic soap, floor wax, and something else. Something metallic and vaguely unpleasant like old plumbing. Just inside the door sits a man at a small battered wooden desk. He is not the hulking guard you might have expected. He's a thin, sallow man in a drab uniform, his face a mask of profound bureaucratic boredom. He doesn't look up as you enter. He simply extends a hand, palm up, expecting papers. This is the heart of the system, not brute force, but procedure. Even in the state's most secret murder factory, the paperwork must be in order. Almost darkly comical detail that was a hallmark of the regime, the obsession with process, with stamps and signatures, as if the right piece of paper could justify any action. You, the invisible observer, have no papers, but it doesn't matter. He seems to look right through you. Then he picks up a heavy rubber stamp and brings it down on his empty desk with a resounding thwack. Historians who have tried to reconstruct the daily life of the Kamera often get stuck on these small details. The memoirs of the few who knew of this place and later spoke of it are maddeningly inconsistent. Did this entrance always have this two-door airlock-like system, a feature more common in high-security biological labs? Or was that a later addition as the lab's work became more ambitious? The debate continues to this day, a quiet academic argument about the precise architecture of a nightmare. Some sources suggest that in the earliest days, security was shockingly lax, relying more on the absolute terror of being caught than on physical barriers. The guard gives a slight, almost imperceptible nod down the hallway. You are dismissed, your footsteps echoing softly on the polished linoleum floor. The corridor ahead of you is long and straight. Doors, identical and unmarked, line both sides. There are no windows, no decorations, just a repeating pattern of grey doors and bare light bulbs. It feels less like a building and more like the inside of a machine, each part clean, functional, and devoid of any humanity. You have been swallowed by the building on VA or son of YEV Sky Lane, and now the only way to go is forward, deeper into the quiet dread of its sterile heart. You begin to walk. The corridor stretches on, a tunnel of pale cream paint and polished grey linoleum. The only sound is the soft, rhythmic scuff of your own shoes on the floor. It's so quiet that you can hear the faint hum of the electricity in the wires overhead, a low, constant thrum that gets inside your head. It's an oppressive silence, a manufactured quiet that feels heavier than any noise. The doors you pass are all closed. All identical, tarnished brass number on each one. 7th, 8th, 9th, they offer no clues. Behind one could be a simple storage closet filled with cleaning supplies. Behind another, an office where a clerk types up reports on chemical acquisitions. And behind a third, well, you try not to think about that just yet. This, you realize, is the genius of the system. Kompotumtionetlusny. It's a core principle of any secret operation, and the NKVD were masters of it. The man in office number 9, who orders specific chemical compounds from a state factory, has no idea what the man in laboratory number 12 is doing with them. The guard at the front door knows only that he is to admit people with the correct, unspoken clearance. The driver of the black car knows only his route. When you think about it, it creates a chain of command where no single link, save for the very top, has a clear view of the entire chain. It allows ordinary people to participate in extraordinary evil, one small, seemingly innocent task at a time. As you walk further down the hall, a new smell joins the sterile chemical scent. It's faint, but unmistakable. Cabbage, and maybe boiled potatoes. It's the smell of shkai, the simple cabbage soup, that is a staple of every Russian kitchen and canteen. The idea is so jarring, so perversely normal, that it stops you for a moment. Somewhere in this building, a place dedicated to the scientific pursuit of assassination, there is a cafeteria. There is a cafeteria. After a day's work, sit down with a tray, a bowl of soup, and a slice of black bread. It's one of those weird, mundane details that makes the whole enterprise feel even more grotesque. I reminded that the architects of this place were not monsters from a storybook. They were men who got hungry at lunchtime. Historians still debate the true internal layout of the Kamera. No blueprints have ever been found, and the accounts of the handful of people who ever saw the inside and lived to talk about it are contradictory. Some describe it as a confusing, maze-like warren of corridors, designed to disorient and trap anyone who didn't belong. Others remember it as a single, straightforward hallway, brutally efficient in its design. The truth is, it probably changed over the years. As the lab's importance grew and its projects became more sensitive, new wings and new security protocols were likely added, turning a simple facility into a labyrinth. The version you are walking through now feels like the latter, a straight, unyielding line, pulling you deeper and deeper towards its logical, terrible conclusion. You've passed at least a dozen doors now. They all look the same, but then you see one up ahead that's different. It's at the very end of the corridor. It's made of heavier steel than the others, and it has a small circular window set into it, the glass thick and reinforced with wire mesh. A red light bulb is mounted on the wall beside it, currently unlit. This is clearly not another office or a supply closet. This is a threshold. This is the door everyone else in the building, with their paperwork and their bowls of soup, is working to support. You feel a cold knot tighten in your stomach. The humming of the electricity seems to get a little louder now. You've reached the end of the hall. The only place left to go is through. You stand before the heavy steel door, the one with the wire mesh window. Your hand feels strangely heavy as you reach for the handle, a thick, lever-style bar that feels cold and solid under your palm. It requires more force than the others. You press down, and with a heavy, satisfying chunk of a well-engineered lock, the door swings inward. You step across the threshold, and the air changes again. The vague smell of disinfectant and boiled cabbage is gone, replaced by a sharper, cleaner, more aggressively sterile scent. It's the smell of pure alcohol, ozone from electrical equipment, and something else, a faint, acrid tang that tickles the back of your throat. You are now inside the chamber. It isn't a vast, futuristic laboratory from a spy movie. It's smaller than you'd expect, and more cluttered. More functional. It's a long, rectangular room, brightly lit by humming fluorescent tubes that cast a flat, shadowless light over everything. The walls are lined with pale green tiles, the kind you'd see in a hospital or a butcher's shop, cool and easy to clean. Along one wall, a long workbench is covered in a controlled chaos of scientific equipment, glass beakers and retorts of all sizes, Bunsen burners, intricate webs of tubing held in place by metal clamps, and several gleaming German-made microscopes. Wires snake across the bench, connecting pH meters and centrifuges to power outlets on the wall. It's a space where serious, meticulous work is done. On the opposite wall are heavy metal cabinets, their doors secured with thick padlocks. The archives, the recipes, the records of every success and, more importantly, every failure. Shelves above the cabinets hold rows and rows of glass bottles and jars, filled with powders and liquids of every color. White crystals, yellow powders, clear viscous fluids, dark amber solutions. Each is neatly labeled with the chemical formula and a code number, a chemist's shorthand for 1,000 different kinds of seed. This is one of the most lethal pantries in the world. A place where a single misplaced spoonful could erase a small town. In the center of the room, there's a stainless steel table, a gurney really, with leather straps. It looks clinical and utterly out of place amongst the beakers and test tubes. It serves as a stark reminder that the chemistry practiced here is not abstract. It has a biological application. The experiments don't end in a test tube, they end in a living organism. And then you see the people. There are 3 of them. 2 men in crisp white lab coats are hunched over a microscope on the workbench, speaking to each other in low, technical murmurs. They look like any university researchers, dedicated and focused. A third person, a woman in a similar white coat, is meticulously measuring a clear liquid from a large beaker into a tiny, delicate phial, her movements precise and economical. There is no sinister cackling, no dramatic pronouncements. Just the quiet, focused hum of professionals at work. It's the sheer, unadulterated banality of the scene that is so deeply unsettling. This is a job, a 9 to 5, and the task for today, it seems, is toxicology. A fascinating and deeply disturbing tidbit of history is that some of the initial equipment for this laboratory was sourced directly from Germany. In the early 1930s, before relations completely soured, the Soviet Union had scientific and even military exchange programs with the Weimar Republic. It is highly probable, almost certain, that some of the most precise and essential scientific instruments in this state-sanctioned assassination lab were stamped with "Made in Germany." Historians still argue about the specifics of these procurement channels, whether they were acquired through legitimate scientific trade or clandestine industrial espionage. Either way, the irony is thick enough to choke on. The tools of one totalitarian regime being used to perfect the methods of another. You watch the woman hold the tiny phial up to the light. The liquid inside is indistinguishable from water. It's clear, it's pure, it's nothing. And that is the entire point. That is the genius and the horror of this place. To take something complex and deadly, and to refine it, purify it, and strip it of all its identifying characteristics until it becomes, to the naked eye, a simple, harmless drop of nothing at all. One of the men at the workbench turns away from the microscope. He straightens up, rubbing the back of his neck, as if to work out a crick. He is not the imposing, sinister figure you might have imagined. He is of medium height, perhaps in his late 40s, with thinning hair combed neatly over his scalp and a pair of round, wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his mind, not with manual labor, dressed in his starched white lab coat. He could be a university professor, a respected physician, or a research chemist at a pharmaceutical company, but he is none of those things. This is Dr. Gregory Mwasiewicz Marinovsky. He is a biochemist, a toxicologist, and the head of this laboratory. He is, for all intents and purposes, the state's chief poisoner. You watch him as he walks over to the woman who is preparing the phial. He doesn't speak, but simply watches her work, his head tilted slightly, a critical, appraising look in his eyes behind the thick lenses of his glasses. He has a presence that is quiet but absolute. The other 2 scientists in the room seem subconsciously aware of his every movement. There is a tension, a deference in the air that tells you he is the one in charge. His authority isn't loud or bombastic. It's the quiet, unquestioned authority of the expert. Maranovsky's story is a chilling case study in the perversion of science. He was a genuine scientist, a published researcher who, before his recruitment into the secret career in biochemistry, he was a member of the All-Union Society of Physiologists. Biochemists and pharmacologists. He wasn't some back alley quack. He was a respected member of the Soviet scientific community. This is what made him so valuable and so dangerous. He brought scientific rigor and a methodical, empirical approach to the art of assassination. Under his leadership, the laboratory moved beyond simply using known poisons and began to innovate, to create entirely new compounds to experiment. One of the great, and still debated, questions among historians is how a man like Maranovsky becomes what he becomes. Was he a true believer, a fervent ideologue who saw his work as a patriotic duty to eliminate the enemies of the state? Was he a careerist and ambitious man who saw a path to power and privilege that was unavailable in conventional academia? Or was he coerced, a man trapped by a system who complied out of fear for himself and his family? The historical record is murky. Given years later when he himself was arrested, is a self-serving uncontradictory mess. He painted himself as a mere functionary, a scientist just following orders, but the evidence suggests he pursued his work with a grim enthusiasm and a relentless, creative energy. You see him take a clean glass rod from a rack and dip it into the clear liquid the woman has prepared. He brings it close to his face, not to smell it, that would be a catastrophic mistake, but to observe its viscosity, the way the light refracts through the single drop clinging to the end of the rod. He seems satisfied. He gives the woman a short, sharp nod of approval. She carefully places a rubber stopper in the file and sets it in a small, padded wooden box. It's a strange and frankly bizarre footnote in his biography that for his work, Maranovsky was awarded the Order of the Badge of Honor and the Order of the Red Banner of Labor. He was, in the eyes of the state, a model worker, a decorated scientist who was advancing his field. It's a perfect example of the surreal, inverted reality of the system he served. Here in this hidden chamber, pioneering a new way to make someone's heart stop was considered a form of productive, award-winning labor. The Doctor of Death was, officially, a hero of Soviet science. The small wooden box, now containing its single phial of clear liquid, is closed. It sits on the workbench like a finished prescription waiting for pickup. And in a way, that's exactly what it is. A prescription for a problem, a custom-tailored remedy for one of the state's many headaches. You watch as Dr. Marady on the next task, the next patient. He is, after all, a very busy man. You drift your attention across the laboratory, this strange and terrible pharmacy. It becomes clear that they are not working on just one project. This isn't a factory assembly line, producing a single product. It's a research and development facility. On another section of the workbench, a different scientist is working with a series of petri dishes. HES not growing bacteria though. He's testing the corrosive effects of a certain compound on different types of fabric. How quickly does it compromise wool? Cotton. The thick, sturdy material of a military greatcoat. The goal here isn't necessarily a lethal agent, but perhaps an incapacitating one, or a way to subtly destroy a piece of evidence. This was the lab's broader mandate. While the perfect, untraceable poison was the ultimate prize, their work covered the entire spectrum of chemical warfare on a personal scale. They developed truth serums, mood-altering drugs, chemicals designed to induce confusion, terror, or despair. Think of it as a complete toolkit for the secret agent. A medicine for every occasion. A medicine for every occasion. The primary focus, however, always remained on the so-called seed compound, or carbylamine cholini. This was Maranovsky's signature creation, his masterpiece. It was a poison that, when ingested in the right dosage, would cause a death almost indistinguishable from a heart attack. The victim would feel a sudden weakness, a shortness of breath, and then nothing. An autopsy, if one were even performed, would show signs consistent with acute cardiac failure. No heavy metals in the tissue. It was, for a time, the perfect weapon. A whisper of chemistry that could silence a voice forever, leaving behind only the sad, believable story of a man with a weak heart. But even perfection can be improved upon. You notice another scientist at the far end of the room. He isn't working with beakers or chemicals. He is holding a simple, ordinary light bulb. He handles it with the delicate care of a watchmaker, wearing thin rubber gloves. In a shallow glass dish beside him is a clear, viscous liquid, almost like a lacquer. Using a very fine camel hair brush, he begins to paint a thin, almost invisible sheen of this liquid onto the glass of the bulb. It's one of those wonderfully bizarre and obscure projects that the lab undertook. The theory was simple. The poison would dry on the bulb, inert and harmless. But when the target in his own home noticed the bulb had burned out and went to unscrew it, the warmth from the recently used filament and the moisture from his fingertips would be just enough to activate the compound, allowing a lethal dose to be absorbed directly through the skin of his hand. It's ingenious. It's diabolical. And it's a perfect illustration of their outside-the-box thinking. Historians are still in disagreement about the lab's methodology. Was their research a systematic, scientific progression, with each experiment building logically on the last? Or was it a more chaotic, throw it at the wall and see what sticks kind of operation? The evidence suggests a bit of both. Marinovsky brought a core of scientific discipline, but the immense pressure from the top, from men who were not scientists and who demanded immediate results, likely led to frantic, almost desperate trial and error. For every elegant solution like the poisoned light bulb, there were probably dozens of crude, failed, or just plain ridiculous ideas that were tested and abandoned, each one with its own silent human cost. You watch the scientist finish coating the light bulb. He places it carefully into a custom-made rack to dry. It looks completely normal. A spare part for a lamp, an innocent everyday object, now imbued with a secret, waiting purpose. It's a different kind of medicine, prescribed not to cure, but to create a vacancy. You look from the light bulb, now drying harmlessly in its rack, to the men in their white coats, and a profound sense of dissonance settles over you. Everything in this room is an echo of a better world. The lab coats, the meticulous measurements, the quiet dedication, these are the hallmarks of a place of healing. A hospital research wing, a university biology department, a pharmaceutical lab working on a new vaccine. The very air of scientific inquiry is meant to be a force for preservation, for the betterment of human life. You find yourself thinking of an ancient promise passed down through millennia of healers, a simple foundational creed: first, do no harm. Here in this room that creed has been broken. It has been meticulously, scientifically, and enthusiastically reversed. The guiding principle of the Kamera is, first, do harm. And then, do it so perfectly that no one ever knows you were there. This is the great Hippocratic contradiction at the heart of the laboratory. It takes the life-giving art of medicine and pharmacology and turns it into its own dark twin. Every piece of knowledge about how the human body works, how the heart beats, how the lungs draw breath, how nerves transmit signals, is being studied here not to sustain those processes, but to find the quietest, most efficient way to switch them off. How do the men in this room reconcile this? It's a question historians and psychologists have wrestled with ever since the lab's existence came to light. The academic world remains deeply divided on the motivations of scientists who serve such regimes. One school of thought suggests it's a matter of ideology. Perhaps Marinovsky and his colleagues truly believed they were patriots. They saw themselves not as murderers, but as surgeons for the state, excising cancerous growth, dissidents, traitors, spies, for the health of the body politic. In their minds, they weren't killing people, they were eliminating threats using the precise, unemotional tools of science. The deaths were just data points on the path to a stronger, purer nation. Another view is much simpler: fear. You look at the drawn, focused faces of the assistants. In a state where a misplaced word could lead to your own disappearance, the command to create a poison is not a request. It is an absolute. Refusal is not an option. Perhaps they worked with such diligence not out of passion, but out of a desperate need to succeed, knowing that failure could mean their own families might be next on the list of test subjects. Their scientific precision was a survival mechanism. And then there is a third, perhaps more disturbing possibility, the seduction of the puzzle itself. For a certain type of mind, the challenge of creating a truly undetectable poison is a fascinating intellectual problem. The moral implications become secondary to the scientific elegance of the solution. The human element fades into the background, and all that remains is a complex equation of chemistry and biology. It's a terrifying perversion of the scientific method, where the thrill of discovery becomes detached from any sense of human consequence. You notice a large steel filing cabinet in the corner of the room, different from the chemical storage. It's a library of sorts, but not for books. This is where they catalogue their creations. And here is a truly chilling and bizarrely practical detail that has emerged from the archives. The poisons were often indexed not by their chemical names, but by their effects. A card might read, Compound 112, induces symptoms of acute gastric distress. Onset 2 hours. Duration fatal, mimics severe food poisoning. Another might be, Variant C2B, simulates coronary thrombosis. Onset, 5 to 7 minutes. Autopsy findings, consistent with natural causes. It was a murderer's recipe book, a summoner's guide to death, where a user could select the perfect vintage to suit the occasion. It transforms the work from simple killing into a bespoke, artisanal craft. The ultimate contradiction, the art of medicine twisted into the art of the perfect, untraceable ending. You focus on that small, innocuous vial sitting in its padded box. The clear liquid inside. It is the culmination of so much work, so much knowledge, so much wrongness. It is the end point of a long and very dark road. The ultimate goal, the project that consumes most of the laboratory's time and resources, is the creation of a ghost, a chemical phantom, a recipe for nothingness. What does that mean? A perfect poison. It's not just about being tasteless and odorless. That's rudimentary. Amateurs can manage that. No, the chemists here are aiming for a much higher, almost philosophical, level of perfection. The ideal substance must have several key qualities. First, a delayed onset. The victim shouldn't keel over immediately after sipping their tea. That's messy and obvious. The ideal poison would work slowly, perhaps over several hours, even a day. Goes home, feels unwell, goes to bed, and simply never wakes up. It creates distance, confusion, and plausible deniability. Second, the symptoms must perfectly mimic a natural illness. A heart attack, a stroke, a sudden respiratory failure. Something a doctor would look at and nod sadly, signing the death certificate without a second thought. It shouldn't cause dramatic convulsions or strange discolorations. It must be quiet, believable, and tragically mundane. The poison shouldn't announce itself. It should persuade the body to simply give up, using the body's own mechanisms against it. And third, the truly masterful element, it must leave no trace. Or more accurately, it must metabolize into substances that are already naturally present in the human body. This is the holy grail for Marinovsky and his team. A poison that, once it has done its job, breaks down and vanishes. An autopsy that searches for foreign chemicals would find nothing out of the ordinary because there would be nothing extraordinary to find. The chemical assassin would have tidied up after itself, leaving the scene of the crime perfectly clean. You watch as one of the scientists takes a sample of blood from a refrigerated unit. He's not preparing a poison, he's doing the opposite. He's testing to see if he can detect the traces of one of their own experimental compounds in a blood sample. This is a crucial part of the process. For every new poison they create, they must also develop the techniques to find it. They have to know what their enemies, the forensic pathologists in London or Paris or Washington, D.C., might be looking for. It is the ultimate cat-and-mouse game, played on a microscopic level. They are simultaneously the world's most advanced poison arrests and the world's most advanced toxicologists, a perfect, self-contained loop of creation and detection. One of the great historical ironies here is the very substance that often formed the basis for their most sophisticated poisons, curare. This potent plant-based neurotoxin, famously used by indigenous peoples of South America on blowgum dog and darts, was a subject of fascination for them. But Rocurare is too easy to detect. Their goal was to synthesize its paralyzing effects to create a compound that would shut down the respiratory system just as effectively, but in a way that left none of the telltale alkaloids behind. It's a bizarre footnote in the history of ethnobating, the traditional knowledge of a tribe in the Amazon jungle, being reverse-engineered and refined in a top-secret Moscow lab to be used as a tool of Cold War politics. But all of this, the delayed onset, the mimic symptoms, the vanishing traces, it all remains theoretical in the beakers and test tubes. Chemistry in theory can only take you so far. A compound that works perfectly on a slide under a microscope might have a completely different effect in a complex biological system. To truly know if your recipe for nothingness works, to see if you've achieved the perfect silent kill, you need to test it. You need a laboratory animal. But for a poison designed to fool a human doctor, a rat or a rabbit is simply not a sophisticated enough test subject. You need a model that is closer to home. You hear a soft, metallic scrape from the hallway outside the lab. A sound that is not part of the usual hum and quiet murmur of the laboratory. It's the sound of a key in a lock, and the slow, reluctant creak of a door opening somewhere down the hall. The final ingredient for the recipe is about to arrive. The scientists in the room seem to take no notice of the sounds from the hallway, but you feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere. A quiet, almost imperceptible tensing. The focused, academic calm of the laboratory dissipates slightly, replaced by a sense of anticipation. It's the feeling a stage crew gets in the moments before the curtain rises. The props are in place, the lines have been rehearsed, and now the actors are arriving. Through the wire mesh window of the laboratory door, you see two men in the simple, drab uniforms of NKVD guards appear. They are not the board functionary from the front desk. These men are built like brick walls, their faces hardened impassive. Between them is a third man. He is thin, almost skeletal, his head shaved. He wears the rough, ill-fitting garb of a prisoner, the kind of shapeless tunic and trousers you would see in 1,000 labor camps across the vast, frozen expanse of the Gulag. He shuffles as he walks, his eyes cast down towards the floor, a look of profound exhaustion and confusion on his face. He is not fighting. He is not shouting. He seems long past that. There is just a deep, weary resignation in his posture. He could be anyone. A poet whose verses were deemed too individualistic. A farmer who resisted collectivization. An engineer who made a calculation error that was branded as sabotage. A loyal party member who fell on the wrong side of an internal power struggle. His crime in the grand scheme of things is irrelevant. He has been given a designation via Ragnar Day, an enemy of the people. And with that label he has been stripped of his name, his history, his humanity. He has ceased to be a person and has become a resource, a piece of biological material to be utilized by the state. The guards guide him not to the laboratory door but to one of the other numbered doors in the hallway. You see them stop, unlock it, and gently, almost professionally, usher the man inside. There is no overt brutality, no shoving or shouting. It's all handled with a chilling, bureaucratic efficiency. The man is a subject, and he is being delivered to the research facility. He has been told, you surmise, that he is being transferred to a special medical facility in Moscow. Perhaps he was picked from the infirmary of his camp, told that his failing health required the attention of top specialists. It's a cruel trick, a sliver of hope offered at the very end. The idea of a clean bed, of proper food, of actual doctors, must have seemed like an impossible dream. He is probably feeling, for the first time in years, a tiny, fragile flicker of optimism. He is unaware that he has been selected for this final, one-way journey for a very specific reason. His medical file, which likely followed him from the camp, probably shows a history of a weak heart, or perhaps a family history of strokes. He has been chosen because his pre-existing conditions make him the perfect canvas on which to paint a picture of a natural death. This whole process of selection is a subject of much debate among historians. How organized was it? Was there a formal system where the lab would send requests to the Gulag administration, saying we need 10 subjects middle-aged with a history of respiratory illness? Or was it more haphazard, with camp commandants sending whoever they deemed most troublesome or expendable? The surviving evidence is fragmented, but it suggests a disturbingly systematic approach. These were not random victims. They were carefully chosen, their medical histories scrutinized to provide the perfect cover story for the experiments. It was science from beginning to end. You hear the door in the hall click shut. The guards remain outside, their job now to simply wait. Inside that small, featureless room, the man is alone. He is probably looking around, at the bare walls, the simple cot, the single unadorned table. He is waiting for the doctor to come and begin his treatment. He is the unsuspecting subject, the final, living component of the experiment. And in the laboratory, Dr. Moxton walks towards the door, his face a calm, unreadable mask of professional focus. The consultation is about to begin. Dr. Marinovsky doesn't enter the prisoner's room. Of course not. That would be unscientific, introducing too many variables. Instead, he stops at an adjacent door, another one of the anonymous numbered panels in the hallway. He unlocks it and steps inside, and you follow, slipping through the door behind him like a ghost. This room is small, dark, and empty, save for a single wooden chair. The wall that it shares with the prisoner's room is not a wall at all. It is a large pane of one-way glass, dark on this side, a perfect mirror on the other. A classic observation room. The stage is set. The audience is seated. A moment later, a different man, a junior assistant in a simple orderly's uniform, enters the prisoner's room. He carries a small metal tray. On it is a bowl of thin, steaming soup, a chunk of black bread, and a simple, thick-bottomed glass of water. He places the tray on the small table in front of the prisoner. He doesn't say a word. He just nods, a gesture that could be interpreted as kindness or simple instruction, and then he leaves, locking the door behind him. The prisoner looks at the food. To him, this must feel like a miracle. Real soup, not the watery gruel of the camp. A full glass of clean water. It's a confirmation of his hope. He is in a hospital. He is being cared for. He picks up the spoon. From your vantage point in the dark, you watch with Marinovsky. The doctor is perfectly still, a silent silhouette against the dim light of the observation room. He is watching the man eat with the detached, focused intensity of an ornithologist observing a rare bird in its natural habitat. Every spoonful of soup, every sip of water is a data point. The poison, you realize, wasn't in some dramatic, injected phial. It was a tasteless powder stirred into the soup. The delivery system is as important as the poison itself. It has to be mundane. It has to be normal. This was part of the lab's grim genius, the dinner and to show method. It wasn't just about killing, it was about observing the precise effects of the poison on a human subject who was, for the moment, common and unsuspecting. They needed to see how it worked in a body that wasn't flooded with the adrenaline of fear or struggle. It was, in their twisted logic, a more controlled experiment, a cleaner result. This little scene, a man being given a meal, is the climax of all the work you've seen in the laboratory. The careful measurements, the heated beakers, the hushed consultations, it all leads to this quiet, lonely moment at a table. It's a point that historians and researchers still argue over, were the prisoners always this unsuspecting? The official narrative from the regime, of course, is silence, but piecing together testimonies, it seems that while the medical treatment deception worked on many, some were more wary. There are fragmented accounts of prisoners who refused to eat, who suspected a trick. What happened to them? The records are blank. They were likely dealt with in a more direct, less scientifically elegant manner. For the experiment to be a success, the subject had to be a willing, if unknowing, participant. The man in the room finishes his soup, he eats the bread, and then he picks up the glass of water. He drains it in a few long, thirsty gulps. He sets the empty glass down with a soft clink. Nothing happens. He wipes his mouth with the back of his hand and leans back, a flicker of satisfaction, perhaps even gratitude on his face. He has been fed. In the observation room, doctor. Marinovsky makes a note on a small clipboard he holds. He clicks a stopwatch he's holding in his other hand. The experiment has now entered its final, most important phase. The wait-in. The observation. He is not watching a man anymore. He is watching a chemical reaction. A biological process, and you are there beside him in the dark, a silent witness to a simple glass of water, and the profound, chilling quiet that follows. The room is silent, save for the soft scratch of Marinovsky's pencil on his clipboard. You stand beside him in the darkness, your gaze fixed on the man on the other side of the glass. The man seems fine. He sits at the table, his posture relaxed, perhaps a bit slumped from the simple exhaustion of his life. He shows no signs of distress. The minutes tick by, 5, 10. The stopwatch in the doctor's hand is a small, insistent presence, measuring out the last moments of a life in quiet, metallic clicks. You feel another presence in the observation room with you. It's not a physical person, not yet. It's a weight, a pressure, the immense, suffocating authority of the men who gave Marinovsky his orders. This entire gruesome enterprise did not spring from a vacuum. It was the direct product of the state's security apparatus, a tool forged to serve the needs of its masters. And no master was more demanding, more feared, than L.A. Virentai Beria. Beria. The very name was a curse whispered in the Soviet Union. As the head of the NKVD, he was the architect of some of its darkest chapters. A man of incredible intelligence, boundless cruelty, and absolute loyalty, not to the state, but to the man at the very top. He was the ultimate spymaster, the keeper of secrets, and the chief enforcer. The Kamera was his pet project. He took a personal, almost gleeful interest in its development, seeing its potential not just for foreign assassinations, but for tidying up internal affairs. He was a micromanager of murder, demanding regular updates, pushing Marinovsky for faster results and more exotic, more reliable products. You can almost picture him standing here, a short, paunchy man in a well-tailored suit, his pince-nez perched on his nose, watching the same scene with a cold, appraising eye. For Beria, this wasn't about science. It was about power. Absolute power. Absolute power. The ability to make a person simply cease to be without fuss, without messy questions. It was the ultimate instrument of control. He was the master consumer of the laboratory's products, the one who would ultimately decide which enemy of the state would receive this final, special prescription. This brings up a fascinating, unstill debated point among historians of the period: the chain of command. Did Beria act on his own initiative, using the lab to eliminate his personal rivals and consolidate his own power base? Or was every single deployment of the lab's creations personally approved by the man above him, by Stalin himself? The truth is almost certainly a messy combination of both. Stalin, with his profound and escalating paranoia, would have seen the lab as an essential tool, but he also cultivated an environment where his subordinates were encouraged to anticipate his wishes. Beria likely carried out assassinations he knew Stalin would approve of, without needing a direct, signed order for each one. This created a perfect system of deniability, where the man at the top could remain blissfully, officially unaware of the gruesome details. Back in the cell, the man shifts on his chair. He brings a hand to his chest, a small, almost unconscious gesture. He frowns slightly, a look of mild confusion on his face. Indigestion, perhaps. The soup might have been richer than what he was used to. He takes a deep breath. In the darkness beside you, Marinovsky leans forward ever so slightly. His pencil is poised over his clipboard. His knuckles are white where he grips the stopwatch. This is the moment, the onset. All the theory, all the chemistry is now manifesting in the subtle, biological language of a human body. The master, whether he is Beria or Stalin, or the abstract concept of the state itself, is not in the room. But his watchful eye, his insatiable demand for results, is felt in the intense, suffocating silence of this small, dark space. The doctor is not just observing for the sake of science. He is observing so that he can write the report that his masters are waiting for. The man on the other side of the glass takes another deep breath, this one more pronounced, a little ragged. He rubs his chest again, a circular motion, as if trying to soothe a sudden, unfamiliar ache. His brow is furrowed now, not in puzzlement. His body is sending him signals he doesn't understand. A moment ago, he felt full, even a bit sleepy. Now, a strange, cold flutter has started in his chest. You are witnessing the quiet, insidious beginning of the end, the poison gently unspooling the very threads of life. But as you watch this grim, focused drama unfold, you become aware that this specific experiment, the pursuit of a perfect, heart attack mimicking poison, is only one part of the lab's portfolio. The demand from the top wasn't just for lethality. You glance around the dark observation room, and in your mind's eye, you see the ghosts of other experiments, other projects that ran concurrently in this very building. One of the lab's most significant side projects was the development of so-called truth serums. The idea was an obsession for secret police forces everywhere, a chemical that could bypass a person's willpower and force them to reveal their secrets. The NKVD, and later the KGB, poured enormous resources into this. They experimented with a cocktail of drugs, often combining barbiturates like sodium pentothal with amphetamines. The goal was to put the subject into a suggestible, twilight state of consciousness where the lines between memory, fantasy, and coercion would blur. The results were mixed. What they discovered, and what Western intelligence agencies also learned, was that these drugs dicked eager to please. A person under the influence would often say whatever they thought their interrogator wanted to hear, weaving elaborate confessions out of paranoia and suggestion. So, while it wasn't a reliable tool for gathering accurate intelligence, it was an incredibly effective tool for producing the scripted, often nonsensical confessions required for the great show trials of the era. The lab's work helped to create the evidence that condemned countless innocent people. Then there were the more exotic psychological agents. Mironovsky and his team were tasked with creating drugs that could induce specific emotional states. Imagine a chemical that could be discreetly administered to a foreign diplomat before a crucial negotiation, designed to make him feel confused, anxious, or irrationally angry, or a substance that could be used on a potential defector, making them feel a profound sense of despair and hopelessness, perhaps even driving them to take their own life. This wasn't about killing the body. It was about assassinating the mind, turning a person's own brain chemistry against them. It was a subtle, terrifying frontier of covert warfare. And here's a truly strange and obscure footnote to their research. They even experimented with using poisons as a method of communication. One documented plan involved developing a chemical that, when applied to the pages of a book, would be absorbed through the skin of the reader. The compound wasn't lethal, but was designed to induce a specific, recognizable set of mild symptoms: a headache, a slight fever, a metallic taste in the mouth. A spy deep undercover could receive such a book and know, simply by how he felt after reading it, a prearranged message: mission is a go, or you are compromised. Flee. Historians still debate whether these bizarre, James Bond-esque gadgets were ever actually used in the field, or if they were just the product of a laboratory with a boundless budget and a mandate to explore every strange possibility. The man in the cell suddenly coughs, a dry, rasping sound. He pushes his chair back from the table and tries to stand, but his legs seem unsteady. He grips the edge of the table for support, his knuckles white. The confusion on his face is now mixed with a dawning, sickening realization. This is not indigestion. Something is terribly, fundamentally wrong. Mironovsky remains motionless, a statue in the dark, his stopwatch ticking, his pencil documenting the precise timeline of a mind beginning to understand its own betrayal. The man stumbles away from the table, one hand still clutching his chest. His breathing is shallow now, coming in short, sharp gasps. He takes a few unsteady steps towards the cot in the corner of the room, as if his only instinct is to lie down, to find a position where this sudden, bewildering storm inside him might pass. He doesn't make it. His legs buckle beneath him, and he collapses onto the floor, not with a loud crash, but with a soft, heavy thud, his eyes wide with the terror that is no longer confused, but sharp and lucid. He knows. He may not know why or how, but in this final, terrifying moment, He knows he has been poisoned. He doesn't cry out. He doesn't scream for help. Perhaps he knows it is useless, or perhaps the poison is already paralyzing his vocal cords, stealing his last protest. His body gives a single, violent shudder, a convulsion that racks his thin frame. And then, he is still. His eyes remain open, staring blankly at the blank wall. In the observation room, Marinovsky takes his stopwatch. He makes a final, precise notation on his clipboard. Time of death, duration of symptoms, visible effects. It is a successful experiment. The poison worked as predicted. The subject expired within the expected time frame. From a purely scientific perspective, it is a triumph. The doctor shows no emotion, no satisfaction, no remorse, just the quiet, focused energy of a researcher who has collected his data. He turns and leaves the observation room without a backward glance. His work here is done, but the process is not. You find yourself drifting through the wall, into another space you haven't seen before. It's adjacent to the cell where the body now lies. This is the final observation room, a place of grim, patient waiting. The body of the prisoner is not removed immediately. It is left exactly where it fell, for hours, sometimes for a full day. This, too, is part of the meticulous protocol. The scientists need to observe the post-mortem effects. Does the poison cause any unusual lividity, any strange discoloration of the skin as the blood settles? Does it produce any distinctive odors as the body cools? These are crucial details. The perfect poison must not only kill naturally, it must also leave a body that looks natural in every respect, hours after the fact. So the man who was once a poet, or a farmer, or an engineer, lies on the cold linoleum floor, becoming the final data set in his own murder. Guards and orderlies pass by the small peephole in his door, taking shifts, making notes on a different clipboard. 1430, subject remains unchanged. 1600, no visible discoloration. It is the ultimate objectification. His body is no longer a human vessel. It is a piece of meat in a laboratory being observed for signs of spoiler. Historians still argue about the sheer number of victims. The official records, of course, were systematically destroyed. But based on the memoirs of defectors and the few surviving internal documents, the estimates are horrifying. Over the years, it is believed that hundreds of people passed through the Kamera and its successor labs. They were the anonymous, uncredited co-authors of Marinovsky's research papers that were never published, but were read with great interest in the highest offices of the Kremlin. One of the most ghoulish and chillingly practical details to emerge about this process concerns the final disposal of the bodies. After the observation period was complete, a team would enter the cell. They would dress the body in street clothes. An official cause of death, heart failure, cerebral hemorrhage, would be typed up on a forged death certificate. The body would then be driven to a city morgue and quietly cremated, or sometimes even released to a distant, unsuspecting relative, if one could be found. The story would be that the prisoner had died of natural causes while serving his sentence, a final, bureaucratic lie to close the file. The system was designed to be a perfect circle, erasing not just the person, but the very evidence of their erasure. The final observation room was the last stop, the quiet, cold antechamber to oblivion. You drift away from the quiet, grim finality of the observation cell, back into the main laboratory. The body on the floor is now just old data, a completed experiment. The scientists' attention has already moved on to new problems, new challenges. The small phial of clear liquid represents only one facet of their work. A poison you have to trick someone into drinking is effective, but it has its limitations. It requires access opportunity. What if the target is wary? What if they eat and drink nothing they haven't prepared themselves? The masters of the Kamera, Beria and his cohorts, demanded more versatile tools. They needed weapons for the field, for the spy on a crowded street or in a quiet embassy corridor. And so a significant portion of the lab's energy was devoted to what they called special means of delivery. It was the birth of a whole new field of study, the art of the disguised weapon. You see a scientist at a workbench meticulously disassembling a fountain pen. It's a handsome, expensive-looking pen, the kind a diplomat or a high-ranking official might carry. He lays out the pieces on a velvet cloth, the nib, the ink reservoir, the polished casing. But he is not cleaning it. He is transforming this elegant writing instrument into a single-shot poison gas dispenser. The concept was brilliantly simple. The ink reservoir would be replaced with a tiny, pressurized canister containing a vaporized form of one of their fast-acting nerve agents. The mechanism that normally drew ink to the nib would be re-engineered into a silent, spring-loaded trigger. A spy, standing next to a target, could feign a stumbling. In the process, accidentally click the pen in the direction of the target's face. A tiny, invisible puff of aerosolized poison would be released. The victim would breathe it in, feel suddenly faint, and collapse. By the time anyone realized what had happened, the agent with the pen would have vanished into the crowd, the weapon safely back in his pocket. This is where the lab's work moved from pure chemistry into the realm of microengineering. They became inventors, tinkerers, the diabolical cousins of a Swiss watchmaker. They worked on a whole range of these devices. You can picture the brainstorming sessions, a room full of brilliant scientific minds applying their intellect to the problem murder. What about a cigarette case that could spray a fine, contact poison mist onto the coat of a man standing behind you in a queue? What about a briefcase with a hidden, spring-loaded needle in the handle, coated in a fast-acting toxin, designed to prick the hand of whoever you accidentally bump into? One of the most famous or infamous of these devices, whose existence is still a matter of some historical debate, was the poison-tipped umbrella. The story, which became a legendary case in the Cold War, involved a Bulgarian dissident named Georgy Markov, who was jabbed in the leg by a stranger with an umbrella on Waterloo Bridge in London. He died a few days later. An autopsy revealed a tiny metal pellet, the size of a pinhead, embedded in his calf. A potent and deadly poison, while the Kamera in its original form was gone by then. This incident is seen as the direct legacy of its work, the perfection of its core principles, a mundane object, a silent delivery, and a death that was initially baffling to doctors. A particularly bizarre and little-known area of their research involved sonic delivery systems. They experimented with a device that could emit a high-frequency sound wave, inaudible to the human ear, which would cause a tiny, poison-filled glass ampule hidden on a target's body to shatter. The idea was that a spy could plant the ampule on the target's coat earlier in the day, then trigger it from a distance later on. It's unknown if this Buck Rogers-style technology ever became functional, but it shows the sheer, unrestrained creativity they applied to their work. You watch the scientist finish his work on the pen. He screws the casing back together. It looks perfect, indistinguishable from the real thing. He clicks the cap into place. A pen that writes not in ink, but in a fine, invisible, and utterly final script. It's a masterpiece of lethal craftsmanship, born in the quiet, sterile heart of the chamber. The scientist places the finished pen into a velvet-lined case, a presentation box fit for a piece of jewelry. This object, born of meticulous science and engineering, is now complete. It has fulfilled its design brief. But what exactly defines a successful project here in the Kamera? The criteria are chillingly precise, and they reveal the ultimate philosophy of this place. A successful experiment, a perfect operation, is one that ends, but with a whisper, a perfect, silent exit. The primary measure of success, of course, is that the target dies. That's the baseline. But it's far from the most important factor. Any thug with a pistol can achieve that. The work of the Kamera was meant to be artful. The death had to be untraceable back to its source. No witnesses, no evidence, no awkward diplomatic incidents. If an ambassador suddenly collapses at a reception, it must be seen as a personal tragedy, not a political act. If a dissident traitor is found dead in his apartment, it must be his weak heart that is blamed, not the long, invisible arm of the state. This obsession with deniability was paramount. Every aspect of the operation, from the chemicals design to the delivery method, was geared towards creating a narrative of natural or accidental death. It was a form of psychological warfare. It sowed confusion and fear. Friends and family of the victim would be left to wonder, was it really a stroke, or was it something else? This uncertainty was almost as powerful as the poison itself. It created a chilling effect. A sense that the state's power was like a force of nature able to strike anyone, anywhere, at any time, without ever showing its hand. You can almost see the checklist that Marinovsky and his superiors must have used to evaluate each new compound or device. Question 1. Is it effective? Does it achieve the desired biological result? Question 2. Is it subtle? Can it be administered without the target's knowledge? Question 3. Are the symptoms believable? Do they mimic a known medical condition? Question 4. And the most critical of all, is it forensically invisible? Does it leave a trace that a foreign coroner might discover? Only a project that received a perfect score on all 4 questions would be approved for use in the field. A fascinating, and somewhat macabre, detail that illustrates this obsession with silence is their research into what they called secondary effects. They studied not just the immediate cause of death, but everything that happened around it. For instance, they found that certain poisons, while effective, caused a brief, involuntary scream at the moment of death. This was deemed a failure. A scream attracts attention. It creates witnesses. The compound would be sent back to the chemists with a new instruction: reformulate to suppress the laryngeal reflex. They were not just silencing a person, they were silencing the very act of their own dying. The academic community still debates the success rate of the Kamera's creations. How many high-profile deaths during the Cold War were actually the work of this lab? It's a historian's nightmare, because the very nature of a successful operation means there is no evidence to find. We know about the failures, the cases where something went wrong and the poison was detected. But the successes, by their very definition, are indistinguishable from reality. They are the quiet heart attacks, the sudden strokes, the unexplained accidents that are recorded in history books as simple, unfortunate twists of fate. The scientist closes the lid of the presentation box containing the pen. Click. It's the sound of a job well done. The creation is perfect. It will be sent up the chain of command, a new tool for the state's invisible arsenal. The ultimate success, the one they are all striving for here in the sterile quiet of the laboratory, is a death so perfect that no one ever even thinks to call it murder. It's a death that simply becomes a sad story, a closed file, a perfect, silent exit from the world stage. You look at the faces of the scientists in the room. Dr. Marinovsky, the assistants, the engineer with the pen. They are calm, methodical, even professional. They exhibit all the signs of people who are good at their jobs. And as you watch them, the most unsettling question of all begins to form in your mind. How do they sleep at night? What are the internal narratives, the private justifications, that allow a person to go home to their family after a day spent perfecting a recipe for ricin? This is a journey into the twisted labyrinth of human rationalization. For a man like Marinovsky, the primary justification was likely a potent cocktail of patriotism and scientific ego. In his own mind, he was not a murderer. He was a soldier. A soldier in a secret, unending war against the enemies of the Soviet Union. His laboratory was the front line, and his weapons were beakers and chemical formulas. He would have seen the prisoners not as human beings, but as enemy combatants, their lives forfeit the moment they chose to oppose the state. Each successful experiment was a victory, a blow struck for his country. Intertwined with this was the pride of the scientist. He was pushing the boundaries of his field. He was achieving things in toxicology that no one had ever done before. In the insulated, morally inverted world of the Kamera, he was a pioneer, a visionary. The praise he received from powerful men like Beria would have reinforced this self-image. He wasn't just following orders, he was a valued, indispensable expert. This sense of importance, of being at the very center of the state's most secret work, can be a powerful narcotic. It can numb the conscience, making the unthinkable feel not only necessary but noble. For the junior scientists and assistants, the justifications were likely more mundane and perhaps more relatable. First and foremost, there was the simple, overwhelming reality of survival. To be chosen to work in a facility like this was both a privilege and a threat. It meant better pay, better housing, access to scarce goods, a life of relative comfort in a society of hardship. But it also meant you knew a secret, and knowing a secret in Stalin's Russia was a dangerous occupation. To hesitate to show any sign of moral reservation would be to sign your own death warrant, and likely does your family as well. They worked diligently not just to please their superiors, but to keep the terrifyingly precarious bubble of their own safety intact. Then there is the power of compartmentalización, a psychological defense mechanism that the human mind is remarkably good at. The scientist who spent his day calculating the lethal dosage of a neurotoxin could leave the lab, take off his white coat, and become a loving father who helped his son with his homework. The two identities were kept in separate boxes in his mind. The work in the lab was abstract, a series of chemical equations and biological problems. The man on the other side of the one-way mirror was not a person. He was subject 73, a variable in an experiment. By stripping the work of its human context, it could be treated as just work. A difficult, technically demanding job, but a job nonetheless. One of the more bizarre and darkly fascinating justifications that has been hinted at in historical accounts is the idea of humane killing. It's a grotesque perversion of medical ethics, but it's a logic you can almost follow. A bullet to the back of the head is brutal. A public hanging is barbaric. But a poison that allows a man to simply, quietly go to sleep and never wake up, in the twisted calculus of the state, this could be framed as a more advanced, more civilized, even a more merciful way of eliminating an enemy. The scientists could tell themselves that they were not vulgar executioners. They were providing a quiet, painless exit, a service that was, in its own way, a kindness. Historians continue to debate the genuine internal state of these men. Were they true believers, cynical careerists, or terrified hostages of the system? The answer is likely different for each individual, a unique and unknowable mixture of all three. But the end result was the same. A group of highly intelligent, highly trained men, each with his own private, carefully constructed set of justifications, coming to work every day to turn the science of life into the art of death. You watch the scientists as they collaborate, sharing notes, pointing to readings on a dial. Their discussion alone murmur of technical jargon. There's a sense of collegial purpose in the room, the kind you'd find in any research team tackling a difficult problem. This image of quiet, professional cooperation brings you to the edge of one of the most contentious debates surrounding the Kamera and other similar institutions. It is the deep, unsettling question of complicity versus coercion. Were these scientists willing partners in the devil's work, or were they victims themselves forced to participate under duress? The truth, as you can probably guess, is a murky, uncomfortable gray. And it's a subject that academic historians still argue about with a surprising amount of passion. One camp, often called the intentionalist school of thought, argues that men like Marinovsky were not just cogs in a machine, they were the machine's engine. They point to the evidence of his enthusiasm, his relentless innovation, the way he seemed to take a grim pride in his work. They argue that he, and others like him, were true believers in the system, ideologues who saw their scientific skills as a weapon to be wielded for the cause. In this view, they were not just complicit, they were active, enthusiastic participants who could have, and should have, found a way to resist. On the other side of the debate is the functionalist or structuralist argument. These historians contend that in a totalitarian system like Stalin's Soviet Union, the concept of individual choice becomes almost meaningless. They emphasize the immense, crushing pressure of the state. The choice for a scientist tapped by the NKVD was not between doing the work and not doing the work and disappearing. Their participation was a function of the system they were trapped in. They were brilliant men, yes, but they were also terrified men, and their primary motivation was survival. This view doesn't absolve them of responsibility, but it frames their actions as a tragic consequence of a monstrous system, rather than the product of monstrous individuals. The debate gets even more complicated when you consider the assistants, the technicians, the administrative staff. What about the woman who typed up the procurement orders for potassium cyanide? What about the guard who brought the prisoner his final meal? Where does their responsibility lie? The functionalists would argue they are even smaller cogs in the machine, too far removed from the final act to be held fully accountable. The intentionalists would counter that every single act, no matter how small or bureaucratic, was a necessary link in the chain of murder, and that participating in it, at any level, was a moral choice. And then there's a fascinating, and deeply human, middle ground in this debate. Some historians have uncovered evidence of subtle, almost invisible forms of resistance. A scientist who intentionally slows down a project, claiming technical difficulties. A lab assistant who accidentally contaminates a sample, forcing an experiment to be reset. A procurement officer who orders the wrong grade of a chemical, causing a delay of weeks. These acts are not heroic, open defiance, cowardly acts of sabotage, the desperate attempts of trapped people to throw a little sand in the gears of the machine without getting crushed themselves. It's a form of resistance that is almost impossible to prove, but its potential existence makes the simple binary of hero or villain feel woefully inadequate. Ultimately, the argument will never be settled. The evidence is too thin, the motives too buried in the past. We are left to look at the scene in the laboratory and draw our own conclusions. Do you see a room full of monsters? Or a room full of brilliant, terrified men who made a series of terrible compromises to stay alive? The most unsettling answer is that you are probably looking at both. Men who were, in their own ways, both perpetrators and victims, their humanity twisted into a grotesque shape by the immense, gravitational pull of the power they served. You feel the atmosphere in the laboratory shift once more. It's not something you can see or hear. It's a change in pressure, a new tension that crackles in the air. A phone rings in an adjacent office, its shrill, demanding sound cutting through the quiet hum of the lab. One of Marinovsky's assistants scurries out to answer it. A moment later, he returns, his face pale, his posture rigid. He whispers something in the doctor's ear. Marinovsky's calm, professional demeanor cracks for just a fraction of a second. A flicker of something, not fear exactly, more like the intense focus of a man who has just been given a deadline by an impatient and extremely dangerous client. The call was from the Lubyanka, a direct inquiry from Beria's office. They want a progress report. They want to know if the new compound is ready. They have a new problem that requires a solution, urgently. This is the engine that drives the Kamera's relentless pace. It is not a pure research facility, allowed to explore scientific questions at a leisurely, academic pace. It is a factory, and its production schedule is dictated by the wild, unpredictable, and ever-growing paranoia of one man, Joseph Stalin. In the early years, the lab's targets were primarily external enemies. Foreign spies, exiled dissidents, leaders of anti-Soviet movements abroad. But, as the 1930s, the focus begins to turn inward. Stalin's purges, his great terror, consume the country. He sees enemies everywhere, in the army, in the government, within his oldest and most loved comrades. The tyrant's fear becomes an insatiable beast, and the Kamera is one of the key instruments he uses to feed it. The lab becomes his ultimate to love political hygiene. An old revolutionary hero who has grown too popular. A general whose loyalty is suspected. A writer whose silence is no longer trusted. A quiet, untraceable heart attack is so much cleaner, so much less disruptive than a public trial and execution. A show trial creates a martyr and requires a messy, fabricated confession. A silent, medical death creates only a sad headline and a convenient vacancy in a high-ranking position. This is where the lab's work becomes truly incestuous. The very men who oversee and fund the laboratory are themselves potential targets. Beria, who delights in the power the Kamera gives him, knows that Stalin could, on a whim, order Marinovsky to prepare a special prescription for him. Marinovsky, in turn, knows that a single failed experiment or a moment of perceived disloyalty could result in him becoming a test subject in his own laboratory. A snake constantly eating its own tail. Everyone is watching everyone else, and the tools of assassination are being perfected in a lab that could, at any moment, be used against its own creators. A fascinating unchilling anecdote from this period involves Nikolai Yezhov, Beria's predecessor as head of the NKVD. YEZHOV was the brutal architect of the most intense period of the Great Terror, a man known as the Bloody Dwarf. When he inevitably fell from Stalin's favor, he was arrested. According to some historical accounts, Beria himself took a personal interest in his interrogation, and it has been suggested that some of the Kamera's experimental truth serums and psychological drugs were used on YEZHOV to break him down and extract his confession. Historians still debate the veracity of this claim, but the very possibility is a perfect illustration of the system's cannibalistic nature. The weapons you create today to use against your enemies can, and will, be used against you tomorrow. The pressure from the top forces the lab to take risks, to cut corners. The demand for new, faster, more exotic poisons is relentless. Marinovsky and his team are no longer just scientists. They are armorers in a desperate, unending arms race against the tyrant's own imagination. The quiet, methodical pace of research is replaced by a frantic, almost panicked urgency. The phone call from the Lubyanka is a stark reminder. Their work is not their own, their brilliance chained to his fear. The years pass like ghosts through the laboratory. The frantic, paranoid energy of the late Stalin in Astera gives way to a new, uncertain quiet. One day in March of 1953, the phone from the Lubyanka does not ring with a new demand. Instead, a stunned silence falls over the entire country. The tyrant is dead. Stalin has had a stroke, a cerebral hemorrhage. He lingered for a few days, and then he was gone. And in that moment, a delicious, terrifying irony hangs in the air of the Kamera. The man who had commissioned the development of the perfect, stroke-mimicking poison had died of a stroke. The rumors, of course, began immediately. Was it natural? Or had someone, perhaps the ambitious and terrified Beria, finally used the master's tools against the master himself? Had one of Marinovsky's own creations found its way into Stalin's final glass of water? This question remains one of the great what-ifs of history, a subject of endless, unprovable speculation. The official story is a natural death, but the circumstances were convenient. The doctors were mysteriously delayed in being called to his side. Beria's behavior in the aftermath was that of a man barely containing his triumphant relief. There is no smoking gun, no deathbed confession. But the shadow of the Kamera, the knowledge that a perfect, undetectable poison for exactly this scenario existed, has forever tainted the official account. Historians still fiercely debate the possibility, poring over the timelines and the medical reports, searching for a clue that will likely never be found. The lab's success was in its subtlety, and its greatest potential achievement may have been a death so perfect it reshaped the world without anyone ever knowing for sure. In the power vacuum that follows, the laboratory and its staff find themselves in a precarious position. Their chief patron, Beria, makes a bold play for power and loses. He is arrested, denounced as a traitor and a foreign spy. And with his fall, his secret projects are exposed to the new leadership. Dr. Marinovsky, the decorated scientist, the hero of Soviet labor, is arrested. He is interrogated, not by his former colleagues, but by a new generation of secret policemen. The lab itself is not dismantled, however. That is the crucial point. The new leaders, men like Khrushchev, who publicly denounce the excesses of the Stalinist era, are pragmatic. They may have been horrified by the methods, but they recognized the value of the tool. A secret, state-sponsored assassination laboratory is too useful an asset to simply throw away, so the Kamera does not die. It is moved from its original location on VAR Son of YEV Sky Lane. It is given a new bland, bureaucratic name. It is placed under the control of a different department within the newly restructured KGB. The research continues. The focus shifts. The rampant internal use of the lab's products is curtailed. The primary targets are once again external defectors, spies, leaders of anti-Soviet movements. The work becomes more refined, more focused on the subtle arts of Cold War spycraft. The era of mass testing on political prisoners comes to an end, but the knowledge they were killed to obtain is carefully preserved, catalogued, and built upon. The fate of Marinovsky himself is a strange, anticlimactic postscript. He was not executed. He was sentenced to 10 years in a labor camp, a bitter irony for a man who had sent so many to their deaths. He served his time and was eventually released, a broken, forgotten man. He tried to return to scientific work but was denied. He died in obscurity in 1964. His story is a testament to the fact, but the system he served so diligently had no loyalty, no gratitude, wrung every drop of his dark genius from him, and then discarded him when he was no longer useful. The monster, having served its purpose, was put back in a cage, but the weapons he had created remained, safely stored in the state's arsenal, waiting for a new hand to wield them. The laboratory you now find yourself in is different. The tiled walls and cluttered workbenches of Mironovskaya's era are gone. This new space is cleaner, more modern, with stainless steel countertops and humming, state-of-the-art analytical machines. The spirit of the place has changed. The frantic, creative chaos of the original Kamera has been replaced by a colder, more corporate efficiency. The scientists are younger, clad in pristine lab coat, their work guided by computer models and gas-chromatograph, but the goal, the fundamental purpose of the room, remains exactly the same. They are still writing recipes for nothingness. And as the years of the Cold War unfold, the whispers of their work begin to escape the sterile confines of the laboratory and echo in the dark alleys of European capitals. The lab's legacy is no longer a secret confined to a Moscow building. It is written in the headlines of newspapers in London, Paris, and Munich. You find yourself on a street in Munich in 1957th. You see a man named Bodenstashwyenskyi. He is a KGB agent, and he is holding a rolled-up newspaper. He is stalking another man, a Ukrainian nationalist leader named Lev Raybet. As Raybet climbs a flight of stairs, Stashwyenskyi approaches him and, from within the newspaper, raises a small, tube-like device to his face. There's a soft "feff" sound, like a can of soda being opened. A fine, invisible mist of crushed cyanide gas hits Raybet in the face, clutches his chest and falls. By the time a doctor arrives, he is dead. The official cause of death: a heart attack. A perfect, silent exit. It's the Kamera's philosophy, put into practice on a foreign street. The weapon was a direct product of the lab's post-Stalinist incarnation, a postgraduate course in lethality. Then you drift forward in time to 1978. You are standing on Waterloo Bridge in London on a grey, damp afternoon. A man named Georgy Markov, a Bulgarian dissident who has been broadcasting anti-communist critiques on the BBC, is waiting for a bus. He feels a sharp, sudden sting in the back of his right thigh. He turns to see a man picking up a dropped umbrella. The man apologizes in a foreign accent to the crowd. Marco thinks little of it, but nothing more. That night, he develops a high fever. He is dead for days later. The British doctors are baffled. But the autopsy conducted by forensic experts at a top-secret chemical defense establishment finds something extraordinary. Embedded in Marco's leg is a tiny metal pellet, just 1.7 millimeters in diameter, made of a platinum-iridium alloy. It has two tiny holes drilled into it, creating a cavity that held a minuscule amount of a deadly poison, ricin. The pellet was a masterpiece of microengineering, designed to deliver its lethal payload and then be almost impossible to find. The umbrella was the ingenious delivery system, a pen that wrote in death, evolved. The signature of the Moscow laboratory was unmistakable. Historians and intelligence analysts still debate the precise organizational chart. Was the KGB department that armed Stashwyenskyi and Markov as a direct, linear descendant of Mironovskaya's original lab? Or had the knowledge been transferred, the expertise spun off into a new, even more secretive department via Directorate S, specializing in wet affairs, the euphemism for assassinations? The paper trail is a labyrinth of code names and numbered directorates, designed to be impenetrable. But the intellectual lineage is crystal clear. The philosophy of the mundane weapon, the scientifically induced natural death, the absolute focus on deniability, it all leads back to the quiet, tiled room on VAR son of YEV Sky Lane. The seeds planted by Mironovskayi, in the 1930 seconds were now bearing strange and deadly fruit all over the world. You find yourself drifting through time again, not through years, but through paperwork. You are in a vast, dusty archive, a place where the secrets of the state are left to yellow and fade. You are chasing a ghost to name. You look for records of Laboratory 1 but find nothing. You search for the Kamera, and the archives return a blank stare. The laboratory, you realize, was a master of disguise not just in its methods, but in its very identity. It was a place that kept changing its name, a bureaucratic shell game designed to ensure it could never be pinned down, never be truly known. It began its life, simply enough, as part of the Special Tasks section of the NKVD. An informal designation for a project that was too sensitive to be given a proper name. Then, as it grew in importance, it became Laboratory First. Then for a time, it was known as Laboratory X, a name that perfectly captured its mysterious, almost mythical status within the secret police. When Marinovsky was purged and the lab was reformed, it was absorbed into a new structure and became Laboratory 12. Each name change was a deliberate act of erasure, a way of shedding its skin, of disconnecting its present work from its dark and bloody past. This constant renaming is a nightmare for historians trying to trace the lab's lineage. Was Laboratory 12 the same physical entity as Laboratory X, just with a new sign on the door, or was it a completely new facility, staffed by different people who only inherited the research notes of their predecessors? The records are intentionally confusing, a web of overlapping directorates, unnumbered departments. It is a perfect example of institutional camouflage, the lab hid in plain sight within the vast, sprawling bureaucracy of the KGB, its budget lines buried in the accounts of a dozen different departments, its personnel files classified at a level that even other KGB officers couldn't access. The location changed too. The original building on VAR Son of YEV Sky Lane was eventually abandoned, its purpose served. The lab was moved to a new, more secure facility, perhaps within the sprawling KGB complex in the Moscow suburb of Yassenevo. Or maybe it was relocated to a dedicated, secret scientific research town, a Novograd, hidden deep in the Russian forests. There are rumors and whispers, but no definitive proof. The lab became a mobile, almost ethereal entity, a concept rather than a fixed address. One of the more bizarre and obscure details to emerge from defective testimonies is the use of cover research. To the outside world, and even to most of the Soviet scientific establishment, Laboratory 12 was officially engaged in legitimate research. Its public-facing work might have been in areas like pesticides, industrial chemicals, or even pharmaceuticals. They may have published dull technical papers in obscure scientific journals. It was all a front, a plausible explanation for their existence. It allowed them to procure chemicals and equipment through normal channels without raising suspicion. A request for a rare alkaloid wasn't for an assassination tool, it was for a new type of crop fertilizer. This dual identity, this bland public face hiding a monstrous secret, was the key to its longevity. The debate among intelligence historians today often centers on this very question. Does the lab, in some form, still exist? When the Soviet Union collapsed, the KGB was officially dissolved and reformed into new agencies like the FSBR. Did they inherit the poison pantry? Most experts believe that the institutional knowledge, the crown jewels of the old laboratory, would have been far too valuable to discard. The direct, linear descendant of Marinovsky's chamber is likely still out there, buried deep within the Russian intelligence apparatus, with a new name, a new location, and a new generation of scientists working on the same old, dark problems. It is the lab that kept changing its name, the secret that refuses to die, a ghost that simply puts on a new mask for each new era. The laboratory seems to disappear for a time, vanishing behind the iron curtain of late-stage Soviet secrecy. The assassinations in the West become less frequent, or perhaps just more successful, more subtle. The ghost retreats into the shadows. The world moves on. But secrets, especially secrets as dark as this one, have a way of seeping out. They are like water. Given enough time, they will find a crack in even the most solid wall of silence. And then in the late 1980s and early 1990s, the wall begins to crumble. The Soviet Union, that monolithic, seemingly eternal superpower, begins to buckle under its own weight. Glasnost, the policy of openness, creates the first tiny fissures. And then the Berlin Wall falls, and the cracks widen into gaping holes. For the first time in 70 years, the archives begin to creak open. You find yourself in a chaotic, poorly lit basement archive in Moscow in the early 90s. The air is thick with the dust of decades. Stacks of files tied with string are piled everywhere. Former KGB officers, now unemployed and disillusioned, are quietly selling off state secrets for a bottle of vodka or a few American dollars. Journalists and historians, both Russian and foreign, are scrambling, digging through the mountains of paper, trying to piece together the true history of a regime built on lies. It is in this chaotic treasure hunt that the first real, documentary evidence of the Kamera begins to surface. A signed procurement order for a rare toxin, found in a misfilled folder. A transcript of Maron Ovsky's interrogation after his arrest, a document that was supposed to have been destroyed. A brief, cryptic mention of Laboratory X in the memoir of a retired general. Each discovery is a tiny shard of a broken mirror. By itself, it shows you almost nothing. But as the historians and researchers begin to gather the shards, a fragmented, horrifying picture begins to come into focus. Then come the defectors. High-ranking KGB officers who see the writing on the wall and make a run for the West, bringing their secrets with them. A man named Oleg Gordiyevsky, a KGB colonel who was a double agent for the British, confirms the existence of the specialized assassination units. Another, Oleg Kalugin, a former KGB general, speaks openly about Department V and its use of exotic poisons. Their testimonies, given in hushed debriefings with Western intelligence agencies, provide the human context for the dusty documents. They put names to the code numbers, and they confirm the whispers that have been circulating for decades. One of the most remarkable, and still debated, sources of information is a man named Pavel Sudoplatov. He was a legendary Soviet intelligence officer, a spymaster from Stalin's era who had been directly involved in planning high-level assassinations. In his old age after the fall of the Union, he wrote a sensational memoir. In it, he described the work of the laboratory in startling detail, claiming direct knowledge of its operations and its targets. Mainstream historians are still fiercely divided over Sudoplatov's book. Is it a genuine, explosive revelation? Or is it the self-aggrandizing, partially fabricated ramblings of an old man trying to secure his place in history? The debate rages on, but his account, whether entirely true or not, added a massive piece to the puzzle, a first-hand narrative from inside the beast. Each new defection, each declassified document, each published memoir is another crack in the wall of silence. The story of the Kamera emerges slowly, piece by painful piece over years. It is a work of historical archaeology, digging up the bones of a secret that was meant to be buried forever. The scientists of the Kamera were masters of erasing their traces. But in the end, they could not erase history. The paper trail, however shredded and burned, and the memories of the men who were there, however faded and self-serving, were enough. The quiet, anonymous building on VA or Son of YEV Sky Lane was finally, definitively, dragged out of the shadows and into the harsh, unforgiving light of day. The light of history now shines into the dark corners of the laboratory, illuminating the workbenches, the filing cabinets, the one-way mirrors. The story is out. We know about Marinovsky. We know about the pens and the umbrellas, the science and the sinister bureaucracy. But as you look around the reconstructed memory of this room, you realize something is missing. The most important part of the story. You look towards the glass beakers gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and for a moment you see them. Reflected in the curved glass, distorted and fleeting, are the faces of the victims. The hundreds of anonymous men and women who were brought here, told they were receiving medical care, and were instead turned into human data points. They are the ghosts in the glass beakers, the silent, uncredited partners in every discovery the laboratory ever made. Who were they? We will never know their names. The records of the test subjects were the first to be burned, the most carefully expunged files in the entire archive. They were designated only by numbers. Subject 12th, Subject 45th, Subject 117th. They were deliberately, systematically dehumanized, their identities erased long before their laboratory's experiments, as inanimate and disposable as the chemicals on the shelves. You can try to imagine them. A professor from Kiev, arrested for teaching a version of Ukrainian history that deviated from the official party line. He is Subject 23rd, a young poet from Leningrad, whose melancholy verses were deemed pessimistic and anti-Soviet. He is Subject 58th, an old Bolshevik, a man who had stormed the Winter Palace in 1917, but who had backed the wrong faction in a power struggle. He is Subject 91st, each one had a life, a family. Hopes, memories. Each one was stripped of that, reduced to a biological response chart. Their contribution to science, in a grotesque and tragic way, was immense. The knowledge of how these exotic poisons affect the human body, the precise dosages, the timelines of their effects, this was all learned from them. Every successful assassination that the KGB later carried out, every foreign dissident who collapsed from a heart attack, owed its success to the silent sacrifice of these forgotten prisoners. They were the unwilling pioneers, the test pilots for the weapons that would be used for decades to come. There is a historical debate, as there is for everything about this place, concerning the final moments of these victims. Were they all deceived until the very end, dying in a state of confused bewilderment? Or did some of them, in their final, lucid moments, understand what was happening? Did they realize that the doctor observing them from behind the glass was not a healer, but an executioner? It's a question with no answer, a final, terrible uncertainty, a testament to the profound psychological cruelty that was layered on top of the physical act of murder. One of the most poignant and obscure details to emerge from the chaos of the opened archives was a single, scorched fragment of a prisoner transport manifest. It listed several names destined for a special medical facility in Moscow. Beside one name in faint pencil was a single scribbled word, P-O-Y-Ort. He sings. What did it mean? Was this man a singer, an artist? Or was it a cruel, cynical joke by one of the guards, noting that this particular prisoner was a songbird, an informer who had betrayed his comrades and was now being disposed of? We will never know, but that one word, that tiny, ambiguous trace of a human life, is a haunting reminder of the stories that were erased. You look at the gleaming, empty beakers on the bench. They have been cleaned, sterilized, ready for the next experiment, but for a moment, if you look closely, you can still see the faint, ghostly reflections of the forgotten. Their stories forever trapped in the cold, silent glass. The ghosts in the beakers fade, and you are left once again with the stark reality of the laboratory. The equipment, the chemicals, the meticulously kept notes. The story of the Kamera is now known, at least in its broad strokes. The silence has been broken. But the work of the laboratory created something more enduring than just a string of covert operations. It created a permanent, lingering uncertainty, a chemical shadow that hangs over history, blurring the lines between fate and conspiracy, between natural death and the perfect crime. You find yourself looking at a series of historical photographs, black and white images of famous figures who died suddenly, unexpectedly, a politician who suffered a fatal stroke during a tense negotiation, a military leader who died of a heart attack on the eve of a major decision, a foreign diplomat who collapsed at a state dinner. Before the revelations about the Kamera, these were just footnotes in history, personal tragedies. But now, seen through the lens of what you know, each one becomes a question mark. This is the lab's most insidious legacy. It injected a poison not just into the veins of its victims, but into the very bloodstream of history itself. It created a permanent, unsolvable suspicion. Now, whenever a critic of a certain regime dies in a way that is just a little too convenient, the question inevitably arises, was it natural, or was it? The mere existence of the laboratory, and the knowledge of its capabilities makes it impossible to ever be sure. It has created a world where we can no longer fully trust the narrative of a natural death for certain people in certain situations. Historians and forensic experts are still engaged in a form of posthumous detective work, a cold case investigation on a global scale. They re-examine old autopsy reports, looking for inconsistencies that might have been missed at the time. They scrutinize the political context of a sudden death, asking the classic detective's question, cui bono? Who benefited? This has led to a number of ongoing, and likely eternal, academic arguments. The death of Raoul Wallenberg, the Swedish diplomat who saved thousands of Jews in Hungary and then disappeared into the Soviet prison system, is one such case. The official Soviet explanation, offered many years later, was that he died of a heart attack in his cell in 1947. Given his age and the harsh conditions, it's plausible. But given the timing and the existence of the Kamera, which was fully operational at the time, many historians are convinced he was a subject of one of Maranovsky's experiments. The debate remains unresolved, a battle of probabilities and circumstantial evidence. Then there is the strange case of the gas guns used against Ukrainian dissidents in the 1950s. For years, the official cause of death was heart failure. It was only when the assassin, Boden-YN defected and confessed that the truth came out. This raises a chilling question. How many other heart attacks from that era were actually the result of similar, unknown weapons, committed by assassins who never defected, who took their secrets to the grave? Even today, the chemical shadows linger. You see a news report from the 21st century. A Russian defector, Alexander Litvinenko, dies a slow, agonizing death in a London hospital. The cause is found to be poisoning by a rare, radioactive isotope, polonium-210. It's a brutishly effective, high-tech poison, but the philosophy behind it is pure chimera. A substance that is almost impossible to detect unless you know exactly what you are looking for. And his daughter are found unconscious on a park bench in Salisbury, England. They have been poisoned with a military-grade nerve agent from the Novichok family. They survived, but the message is clear. The methods have evolved, the chemical formulas have changed, but the lab's dark spirit is very much alive. The science of the silent, deniable, state-sponsored assassination continues, a direct, unbroken line from the cold, tiled room you've been standing in. The hum of the laboratory begins to fade. The sharp, sterile smells of alcohol and ozone soften and dissolve. The harsh fluorescent light dims, replaced by the pale, hazy glow of a Moscow winter street lamp, seen through a dusty window. The tiled walls of the laboratory become the rough, plastered walls of a simple corridor. You are moving backwards, drifting away from the dark heart of the building, back towards the world of the living. You pass the numbered doors, each one a silent monument to a forgotten story. You pass the small, empty observation rooms, their one-way mirrors now reflecting only darkness. The oppressive, manufactured quiet of the inner sanctum gives way to the more ordinary silence of an old building at night. You can hear the faint groaning of the heating pipes, the whisper of the wind against the window pane. You reach the end of the long hallway, back at the small, battered desk where the bored-looking guard once sat. He is gone now. The desk is empty, covered in a thin layer of dust. The heavy rubber stamp lies on its side, a relic of a bureaucracy that has crumbled. You walk towards the double doors that lead to the outside world. They are unlocked now. No pneumatic seals, no hidden bolts, just a simple heavy doors. You push the first one open and step into the small, cube-like antechamber. For a moment, you are back in that sterile purgatory, the space between the secret and the street, but it no longer feels menacing. It just feels empty, old, a place whose purpose has ended. You push open the final, grey metal door, the door with no name, and you step outside. The cold hits you, a clean, sharp shock after the stale, recycled air of the building. It's the same cold you felt when you first arrived, but it feels different now. It feels real, alive. You take a deep breath, and the air in your lungs doesn't feel like it's crystallizing. It feels like it's scouring you clean. You are back on VIS on a YEV Sky Lane. It's late. The snow is still piled in soft mounds along the pavement. The street is empty. The black CIS 101 is long gone. The building behind you is just a building again. An anonymous, grey stone structure, its windows dark. If you were to walk past it now, you would think nothing of it. An office building, closed for the night, a block of apartments, its residents asleep. There is no sign, no plaque, no memorial to what happened inside, has forgotten, or perhaps it never knew. The story of the Kamera is a journey into a place where science was stripped of its soul, where healing became hurting, and where life became data. It is a chilling reminder of the capacity for human ingenuity to be turned to the darkest of purposes, and of the terrifying, quiet efficiency of a state that decides who is, and who is not, a person. It is a story with no heroes, only perpetrators, victims, and the vast, uncomfortable gray space in between. And it's a story that historians are still piecing together, arguing over the details, trying to shine a light into its deepest, most resilient shadows. Was Stalin's death the lab's final greatest masterpiece? How many natural deaths in the history books are nothing of the sort? The questions linger, unanswerable, a permanent fog of uncertainty. The poison, in the end, was not just chemical. It was metaphysical. It poisoned our ability to ever fully trust the story we are told. You pull your collar up against the wind and turn away from the building. You begin to walk, your footsteps the only sound in the frozen quiet. You leave the building behind, a silent tomb of secrets, sealed once more in the cold Moscow night. And you drift away from it, back towards your own quiet room, your own safe bed, leaving the chemical shadows to the past. And so, our story, for tonight, comes to a very gentle and quiet close. The building on VAR Son of YV Sky Lane fades back into the mists of history, and the cold Moscow snow begins to fall again. Soft and white. Covering everything in a blanket of silence, you can feel a similar quiet settling over you now. A comfortable and heavy stillness. As the details of the story begin to dissolve, like snowflakes on a warm hand, leaving behind only a feeling of deep, deep rest. There is nothing left to analyze, nothing left to understand. The journey is over, and you are safe, in the warmth of your bed. The world of the story can now drift away completely, allowing you to drift even further, into the peaceful, quiet landscape of your own deepest sleep. The final word has been whispered. If your mind is still gently stirring, you're welcome to drift into another of my stories. If not, I wish you a deep and peaceful slumber. Good night.